The impudence, the audacity, the unmitigated gall of those knuckleheads of liberty podcasters, daring to voice opinions outside the mainstream of accepted thought. Listen if you dare. It's angry, it's funny, it's even sometimes sad, but it's always based on freedom and justice, as you will see. Here's our host, Jason McPhee.
Welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty. We're coming at you on September 28th, 2022, staring just a little bit further into the abyss that the Biden administration has us in every week. It seems just amazing. But we actually have something great to distract us this week. We have John Papola. He is the CEO of Emergent Order and the host of Dad Saves America. So he's going to be joining us today to talk about that. Let me introduce you to the rest of our panel. In our upper right-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. And unfortunately, our screaming eagle of freedom is going to be off screaming somewhere else for a few weeks, I guess. But we hope to have him back soon. And I'm your host, Jason McPhee. So let's jump right into it. So John, tell us a little bit. Well, before you tell us a little bit about your thing, Leon, could you bring up the web pages? So let me show. So Dad Saves America. It is a podcast that John is doing, and we'll let him talk a little bit about that. For some of you, you may remember him as well. He is the talent behind the Keynes Hayek rap video, Fight of the Century, which I just thought was amazing, and it's a great way to pick up a little bit of insight on economics. So, but right now, what John is focused on is his podcast, Dad Saves America. So we're going to talk about that this show. And so, John, you want to tell us a little bit about your podcast and sort of what the mission of that podcast is?
Sure. Well, it's both a podcast and, like as you've got here on the screen, a YouTube channel. We produce really, I think, high quality videos, and really, the mission of Dad Saves America is to celebrate fatherhood and healthy masculinity, and to say that in your own life, you have this sphere of control as a man and as a father, where you can make the lives of the people around you better and use your freedom to do something good. And that is where you can make the most positive impact for the country. And, that in a way should go without saying, but in our culture and our climate today, where boys are basically told that their time is done and the future is female from an early age, from kindergarten, and men are basically reviled as being toxic and marriage as antiquated, and dads as unnecessary. We are trying to put a positive message out there that also counteracts these toxic, poisonous messages that are in our culture. That every social scientific study of the health of human beings has found that dad being in the picture and playing an active role in the life of the family is a central determinant of the success of the kids, both yes. Boys and girls.
Yes.
And the people who have studied this tend to be liberal-minded, left-of-center people, and yet they can't help but discover the fact that we all kind of know, which is you need dad. Dad needs to be there. And America leads the world in fatherlessness by an alarming amount. We are, it's between 30 and 40% of American kids are being raised without a biological step or adoptive father. That is under 9% for the rest of Earth. So we think of America as this exceptional country that leads the world in free enterprise and innovation and doorbells in the middle of podcasts. But what actually happens, we have like this deep malady in our society. We are sick as a country that this is going on. How is it that Norway is beating us on fatherhood?
Yes,
that's great.
Yes.
Well, hey, and by the way, too, Leon, could you bring up the visual again real quick? This is something I was saving for a later podcast, but this really gives the statistic of kind of what John is sort of getting at. I mean, this is from the U.S. Census,
Yeah.
and they're talking about the number of children, living with only their moms has doubled in the past 50 years. And there's a
Yes.
little bit of a graphic here that they have as well that just shows that change over time, and that's a really disturbing trend. I'm not sure if that completely tells the story, but it certainly tells part of the story, and it's really disturbing. So yeah, you guys can go back
You
though,
know,
and yeah.
but John, you raise a very good point here about fathers in the home, and it's an issue that's near and dear to my heart. I grew up with a father in the home, and it was a very great experience for me personally, and I've tried to raise my kids in the same fashion by being a father in the home. But you talk about you went to Norway to show an example, but if you look at the inner cities of America, fatherless homes are alarmingly high in
Yeah.
the inner cities of America, and look at the condition of the inner cities. So your very point about fathers and their influence on society, we could see them right here in the inner cities of our own country.
Well, all you have to do is go to a prison and talk to the men there. It's all men, of course. It's
Yes.
like 98% or something of all incarcerated people are men. And ask them to raise their hand if they had their dad in their life. And for every 10 enrollees, one might raise their hand saying they had their dad.
There you go. Yes.
And so it's a criminal justice issue. It's genuinely there's a lot of talk of systemic problems in our society. And a lot of times that's just like this buzzword used to socialize responsibility and to misdirect people for what's
Yes.
going on. But
Yes.
frankly, it's hard to understand why America has seen this family collapse to this extent in this particular way. When you look at the planet as a whole, it really is, because we're not the only country that has a robust welfare state.
Right.
We can definitely, the welfare state certainly played a role. It incentivized family breakups, especially in the early days. But that isn't the whole picture, because again, I brought up Norway for a reason. They got huge social safety net.
Yes.
And yet our fatherlessness outpaces Scandinavia, among other places. It's really strange. And I think it is fundamentally a cultural feedback loop that if we don't break, it's going to break us.
Do you
But
think
that
maybe,
raises. I'm
well,
sorry.
I was going to jump into and say, Jonathan Haidt has talked a lot about how there's this feedback loop with the universities where they've just sort of gotten more and more, I guess, into echo chambers, and that maybe some of the messaging of that is sort of what's feeding back and causing that loop. Because he talked about how, maybe back in the 60s, you might have had sort of a diverse split maybe in sociology departments of maybe it might be 2 to 3 or 2 to 1 rather on the left maybe, but now it's literally like 1 in 20 if that. I mean, it's just actual echo chambers. And I mean, maybe that's where this messaging is coming through, that it's just
well, in a very real sense, Jonathan Haidt's work has played a pivotal role in what we're doing, because I know John Haidt, not like best friends, but we've met on many occasions. We have him in one of our videos, on one of our first launch videos on the website. And this project actually began life as a feature documentary. I've directed several feature films, and I noticed something in my own life, which is my son's peers were suffering, and some are suffering from anxiety and depression in ways that I don't remember seeing with my friends growing up.
Right.
This goes well beyond just ADHD. This is social disorders, pathologies, and then you see what happens on college campuses, and you see the vitriol and the infantile temper tantrums that people who are the average age of the people who operate nuclear aircraft carriers.
Yes.
So the average age of people on an aircraft carrier is 19. These are nuclear powered war machines, and that's the average age of the men and women operating them.
Right.
Go to Swarthmore University. And you've got 19, 20, 21-year-olds acting like babies, throwing temper tantrums.
Yes.
Because they don't want Charles Murray to come to their campus, or anyone, or even Bill Maher for that matter. It's like, I can't. I'm going to be triggered. This transformation of challenging thought into the language of trauma and injury, and speech is violence, but silence is also violence. So it's all violence. It's violence. If you talk, it's violence. If you shut up, it's violence. And so it was like, where did this come from? And Haidt writes about this with Greg Lukianoff in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind. And so I started to work on this film project about that. And I realized, like, man, this isn't one film. This needs a constant exploration. And his work does have a blind spot. And that blind spot is what has happened to the American dad. So he's got this picture. We have social media, which has all these pathological impacts on our kids. We've got this sort of so-called social justice movement, which tells their kids that the world is broken up into victims and victimizers, and they're a victim, and it's kind of good to be a victim, and you get extra points in the chain of intersectional hierarchy if you're a victim, and how many intersections of victimhood can you stack up to be on the top of that chain. And that's terrible. So that's making a bad situation worse. And then we've got overprotective parenting, and the way in which we don't let our own kids do the things that all of us grew up doing.
Right.
And yet, like, where did that, like, why has the American family become so overprotective? Well, maybe it's because the guy, literally the guy, who isn't as uncomfortable with his kid climbing a little too high in the tree, isn't there. The guy who's willing to say, hey, let him walk to the store, he's gonna be fine, isn't there.
That's a really good point you're making, but there's obviously a very perverse incentives for fathers to be out of their homes. And I am wondering, where do you think, what is the genesis of this? I mean, I think I've kind of spoken about this on this show previously, but not in the detail of which you are speaking. But I've always thought this genesis, this breakup of the American home started in the 60s with the welfare state. But maybe it did not. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I don't want to claim more expertise to the history than I have, but what is interesting is that and the name of the report is escaping me, but Patrick Moynihan, who is really, I think, kind of an interesting figure.
The two Americas he was speaking about. Yes, I'm familiar with the report.
So he wrote about the breakdown of the African American family.
Yes, he did.
And at the time in the 60s, this is really before the welfare, the Great Society programs really created this strong financial incentive for poor people, especially African American families, but not exclusively, to basically not attach and marry because you'd get less benefits if you married, so you stayed apart.
Yes,
which is really, it's like unintended consequence that really, how is that not also evil? Who cares what your intention was? I should measure the outcome.
Sure.
But the illegitimacy or the family breakup rate, the families that were broken homes was like 35% for African American families at the time of the writing of that. Now I think it's been broadly talked about, that rate is now over 70% for African Americans, which is an absolute heartbreaking tragedy.
Yes.
But it has stabilized at a high level, but it's stabilized. Here's the thing that nobody talks about. Today, the rate of fatherlessness and broken homes among white Americans is over 35%. So it is where it was, back when Moynihan was sounding the alarm, I think compassionately for African American families. It is for all families. Everybody is broken now.
Yes.
And that doesn't make it any bigger a crisis, except that physically does, because there's a lot more families in that cohort of, white and Hispanics. When you roll it all up together, that's how we end up leading the world in fatherlessness. And I don't know the answer for why. I think it's it's a feedback loop for sure. There's the culture. There's the fact that some marriages should be dissolved, right? So you have the rise of the birth control pill and the women's liberation movement that I think largely follows from that technological change. Jordan Peterson has talked a lot about this, and I think correctly that, that is a disruptive technology and a social movement.
Yes.
And so if you as a woman can go out into the workforce more easily, I mean, there was Rosie the Riveter, right? And I mean, Aunt Jemima was an entrepreneur. It's like, it's not like you couldn't be a woman and build successful businesses, or, Grace Hopper, is at the leading of silicon innovation. It's like, we've got plenty of incredible women in American history who've done unbelievable things in business and in the workforce, but you have this sudden transformation. And so the divorce rate in the 70s goes up really dramatically, and it actually has stabilized. So I think those things are coming together. So you have the rise of divorce. You have no fault divorce, which I think actually starts in California with Ronald Reagan as governor. And so now it's easy to get divorced.
Yes.
And maybe from a libertarian perspective, that's good. I don't have an opinion about that either way. I don't know enough about the subject, but it's all part of this transformation, which in a way I think is a challenge for how to think about a rich understanding of liberty. Because, is freedom the only value? And I think most thoughtful people would say, no, of course not. There's other values that matter. We bind ourselves to our spouses, and it makes us less free along some dimensions.
Of course.
And it's by choice. Yes. And is it a good thing to make it easy and free to exit that relationship with no cost? I don't know. Maybe not. But that's what happened. And that's our experiment. I think what's interesting is everybody likes to talk about Europe as it's always like kind of to the left of America. But when it comes to these issues, it's not. It's harder to get an abortion in Europe. In France, for example, it's harder to get divorced. It's harder to do a lot of these things that we are sort of free to do, come what may.
Well, John, I guess I wanted to jump onto this one point because I heard you discuss, some issues of liberty in there as well. And one of the things we always like to ask our guests when they're on the show is how they came to discover liberty, because this is one of the problems that we have in our current government schools. Essentially, the solution to every problem is taught to be, you just vote on it, if you want some kind of social solution, or you have government figure it out, don't worry, we have some smart people in control. And so it's really hard. I mean, for me, I didn't discover a lot of these things until I was in my 30s. And I was just curious what your story was, so our guests can kind of know how you came to understand this.
Well, I sort of always was more politically conservative minded. I'm not especially rebellious. I certainly wasn't growing up. I have a great relationship with my dad. And so I kind of adopted his sort of Italian Catholic conservatism as a kid. A combination of John Stossel and Ron Paul really got me thinking about things in a deeper way. And that 2007 Republican primary where Ron Paul got on stage and talked about how that 9/11 was partly the result of us being over there, as he said. We're over there. So of course they're going to come here. And that was such a sort of shocking thing to hear, right? And if you hadn't really thought about things or understood things the way he does. And so I started reading about Hayek and Austrian economics because of that exposure from Ron Paul. And actually my like young cousin Billy at the time, who's politically probably as far away from me as one can be, but we love each other nonetheless. He was like, you know what? You sound like a libertarian, because we were chatting online. And so I started looking more into the philosophy and went down the rabbit hole. I mean, I've, one of our other videos, Mises versus Marx, is I'm a big fan of Hayek, but I think temperamentally, I might personally be a little more like Mises.
Well, certainly the Mises is doing well in the in the Libertarian Party right now. With
Indeed, yes,
the
indeed.
Mises caucus is sort of taking over. But yeah, it's funny too that you mentioned Stossel, because that was my gateway to Friedman, which was then where all the doors then sort of opened up and everything started to make sense. So
Well, it's one of
yeah.
these things too. I think everybody has a different temperament, and I always liked math. And even though I'm a creative person and a filmmaker and whatnot, I always liked math and logic and argument. And
Yes.
the argument against government doing much of anything is just really good.
Yeah. Oh yes.
Like,
Oh,
I don't
yes.
know how anybody turns on the news and is like, oh, I want these people to do more.
Yeah.
Like, who thinks that? I know there's a kind of utopianism of no. These people we have now are corrupt. But if we just all get engaged and vote and get turnout and get money out of politics, we can get better people in charge and they'll have our interests in mind. And I think that's about as steel man a position I can offer for that worldview. Is we just need engagement in order to have democracy work. But sometimes democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding who's for dinner. Or a lot of times democracy looks like a group of 5 people trying to decide, or even worse, a group of 6 people trying to decide where they should go for dinner tonight. It's like, this is why freedom works, because, well, look, in a free society, I can order what I want for dinner and you can order what you want for dinner.
Yeah.
And I might hate what you want, but you're not forcing it on me and vice versa.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, oh, I don't like that they're teaching this, obscure law theory, critical race theory in school. Well, if I'm not forced to pay for that nonsense,
Right.
I don't really care. But if you're going to reach into my pocket and take it and then force feed it along with compulsory attendance to other people's kids, or even worse, my own, well, now I got something to say about it.
And then force feed it into the minds of our kids. I mean, hey.
Well, it's in the Communist Manifesto, but have the state take over the schools. They were onto that from an early age.
Yes.
It was funny too. You mentioned you can't even turn on the TV and say, I want these people running it. My gosh, I don't want to go too far down the COVID rabbit hole here, because I want to spend time talking about you. But my gosh, how could people have lived through this trampling of our liberties over the last couple of years and say, yeah, I want more of that?
Exactly. No effect. It's like, I was vocal. So my dad's a doctor. Both his parents were doctors. I got the Pfizer shot and a booster, mostly because my parents wanted me to get the booster before I visited them. I'm in no way anti-vaccine. I think vaccines are a technological marvel. And when I saw the Israeli studies that came out early in the pandemic about how effective those early ones were against the initial COVID virus, I was like, well, this seems like a win-win. This is great. Like 500,000 people taking this vaccine and nobody getting sick. Wow, this is amazing. This is capitalism. This is like inventing new solutions to problems.
Right.
But then they decided, well, we're going to force everyone to stay in their homes.
Yes.
And everyone, not just the sick. In fact, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take the sick and put them in elder care facilities.
Yes.
It's like,
imagine that.
Imagine that. Couldn't design stupider decisions than what was done. Oh, I'm going to take sick elderly people and put them in nursing homes. It's like, are you serious? What is happening here?
We're no longer living in a represented republic. Let me just tell a quick story here. And I know we're running a short time, but I want to tell a quick story here. On the last Thursday of February in 2020, James, who's our producer, myself and Jason was on a show, and we were talking about what we should do if someone gets sick, right? Should we quarantine sick people? Okay.
Yeah.
And not knowing that a month later, all of us is going to be quarantined, and we're not even sick. This is
At that
unbelievable.
time, we were just hearing about this thing coming from China and the idea,
Yes.
hey, they're quarantining in other countries. Is that going to happen here? Will we quarantine the sick? That's what we were debating. And
Right.
well, we had no idea they were just going to quarantine everybody.
Well, and to come back to what we do as parents, it didn't stop there, right? Because I mean, I'm in Texas, so life got back to normal quicker here than in other parts of the country, like poor Leon in California, in the People's Republic of California.
Yes.
You know, hey, well, you know, at least you've got open air drug markets on every street corner at the homeless places. So at least you got that. That's a libertarian paradise right there.
Yes.
They shut down the schools, which on one hand is probably good because so much of the public school system deserves to be shut down and completely rethought. But on the other hand, the psychosis that goes into saying we should take we learned pretty quickly that the risk to children, especially young children, was basically none.
Right.
So you're going to take developing young children who are still trying to figure out what it means to have an emotional life, and they learn that through seeing their parents' faces and the faces of other people. And you're going to cover those kids with masks that we know don't work, that, the so-called experts were telling us don't work and aren't helpful until suddenly they were absolutely essential. Like, nobody serious believes that cloth masks on a 4-year-old in preschool does anything other than trap snot and bacteria at their face. And yet here we were doing this to millions and millions of kids. And honestly, the upside is I think it's awakened millions of parents that they need to completely rethink this thing, and that the teachers unions and the schools don't have their kids' interest in mind at all.
That's right. That's
Well,
exactly right. Yes.
And we saw this hypocrisy at the Super Bowl in California, where literally the politicians who were calling for the mask mandate were not wearing the mask, and yet they were forcing little children, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, who lived in the same area to wear masks. But John, we're getting really close to the end of the show, and I was wondering, do you have any plans or anything else that you're looking forward to with your Dad Saves America that you wanted to let the audience know about, and any final thoughts as well?
Well, first of all, please go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dad Saves America. Check it out. We've got exciting stuff coming up. We just filmed an episode with Dr. Drew talking about addiction and mental health. That's going to be coming real soon. We've got
Leon, can you pull up the visual too real quick here? Thanks. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, and we've got great stuff about to drop on the channel and on People Magazine, actually, featuring this past year's Oscar winner, Troy Kotzer, who won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar for the movie Coda, his role in the movie Coda. And he told this great story about his relationship with his dad. It's an incredible story of overcoming the mentality of victimhood, even when you face real challenges, not just made up challenges. And so please go check it out at dadsavesamerica.com for the website, youtube.com/dadsavesamerica. And we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So if you really love what we're doing, I ask you to head over to the website, become a supporter of what we're doing so that we can, get the word out about the heroic role of dad in the American family.
Awesome. Well, you couldn't have a more timely message right now. So thanks for joining us, John, on this one. And we'll definitely have you on another podcast that we're going to do shortly to talk about some of these specific topics on kids. But thanks so much for joining us. And until then, for the rest of you out there, stay free until the next one.
Indeed.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.
Well, thanks, John. That went great. And I guess we'll jump over to the next link to